we get to hear now about centering communities. So I'm curious, for all of you storytellers out there, how many of you prefer to tell stories about things that you have directly experienced, just by a show of hands? Or it's shaped in some way by something that you've experienced. Okay, how many of you, in some form, the stories that you share are about something that you've observed in the world or noticed around you? Okay. How many of you, your stories are informed by things that you read about or that you talk to others about? Yeah? Okay, so thinking of, and it's probably all three in some form, though we have different ways in, obviously, but I think recognizing our relationships with the communities, like we were just hearing so beautifully demonstrated, the relationships that we're trying to build and the relationships that we already have. So building these with relationships. So we're gonna get to hear now about centering communities from the Ilíiaitchik Indigenous Correspondents program, and we'll really be hearing about this building of community, sharing stories about communities, and ethical engagement across cultures with communities. So I'd like to welcome Ivey, Camille, Manybeads, our Indigenous Correspondent program editor, and Indigenous Correspondents as well. So thanks so much.
Hi, Ivey, Camille, Manybeads, So really quickly, I'm Navajo, Diné, all of us are Native. And traditionally, I have to introduce myself every time we walk into a new space. Anytime we're in a new place, we start with what we call ke, which is relationships. And being here, we're building relationships. So I introduce myself, but I'm gonna allow everyone to go on down and introduce themselves as well.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Robyn, and I'm a member of the Taliyah tribe in Montana, and I'm also Northern Cheyenne.
Hello everyone, my name is Joshua Massey. I'm a member of the White Mountain Apache tribe in northern Arizona.
My name is Mint Woman. My government name is Taliyah Medicine Horse, and I am an enrolled member of the Taliyah tribe, as well as the Northern Cheyenne tribe of Montana.
Hi, my name is Karli Moore. I am Lumbee from the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. My parents are Eddie and Tyra Moore, and I grew up in our homelands in Robinson County.
Yes, and then really quickly, we'll start with Karli. Will you just tell us what story you worked on in your piece?
Yeah, I have a written essay titled A Native Farmer Growing a Native Crop, the Role of Fiber Hemp in a Sustainable Future.
I'm currently still working on my piece. It is navigating two worlds, trying to reclaim traditional medicines as well as walking in Western academia.
I did mine on bracing fire, the cultural significance of bringing back cultural fire back to the land.
Yeah, and I'm still working on mine as well. I call it the Fry Bread Project, and I'm not sure if anybody knows what fry bread is. And so really it's focusing on entrepreneurship on Native reservations and really how they're using their food systems to kind of create like a business. So yeah, there's a lot to it, but yeah, that sums it up.
Sweet. So Ilíiaitchik, the Indigenous Correspondents program, is trying to bring Native voices into the journalism sphere, allowing for Indigenous science to be at the forefront. And so we'll just get right in. Joshua here is incredible. What are the challenges that you face when entering smaller communities?
Some of the challenges I face getting into a lot of these communities is lack of understanding of why we're there. I'm a wildland firefighter by trade, a fire archaeologist to be exact. I work with a lot of the indigenous communities throughout the U.S. So yeah, just lack of understanding of why we're there. What the processes are. They're so secluded in a lot of areas. It's kind of hard to bring modernization into that. Because they're kind of set in their own ways. So you kind of got to find a midway point for that.
Yeah. And then Taliyah, some communities have similar and different values. And how do you respect those values when working on stories?
Well, first, it's important to set boundaries because a lot of tribes have certain protocols, and in order to obtain certain information, sometimes you'll have to go through certain ceremonies or just certain steps in order to gain certain stories or information. It's also important to collaborate with communities rather than going to them for information. Most of the times on our communities, get researchers coming to us and telling us that we need to do something or we need to tell our story. but they never come to us and ask what we need to tell or, yeah, sorry. Also, I think it's really important to use your voice to amplify Indigenous voices rather than using their voice to amplify yours, because at the end of the day, it is our stories. Indigenous people have been stewards of the earth since time immemorial, and it's important to give them a seat at the table where these discussions are being had.
Yes. Get it? I know. Round of applause. Come on. Alrighty. And then, Robyn, you're still in the middle of, like telling that story and moving forward. So what is a priority of yours when entering a new space?
Yeah, so I think when, especially from a journalistic perspective, I think we understand that anytime that we are entering a new space, we have to remember that we're there to learn, and also that we're not always going to be welcomed right away. And I learned that I am Crow in Northern Cheyenne, which is southeastern Montana, but I also live way up north in Montana, and it's a completely different tribe. And so trying to really connect with them and do stories with them, it didn't happen right away. And that's because they had sort of a relationship with media and journalists that wasn't always the greatest. There's a lot of parachute journalism. It's a beautiful country. And so it was really important when I wanted to meet with them, I understood that I would have to go to the council and introduce myself, and for them to get to know me and really understand that, I really want to tell the truth. And especially when you're entering into new communities, it's very important that you are also telling the real truth of the people. It's the truth that you're not always going to find in books. Just like the rest of us, I was also taught westernized education. And so I'm really relearning my history of my people and of other tribes as well.
Sweet, all righty. And then Karli, your story is just so heartfelt, but it really focuses on your family and on your dad and specifically. So what was it like sharing so much of your family in your story?
Yeah, I didn't start there. I started with lots of ideas. I'm a graduate student. I focus on sustainable agriculture and tribal governance. And I was thinking about how can I use this unique opportunity to tell a story that will matter to my community. And I thought that I would talk about my research, and that would be, another way to get out of the ivory tower. But in conversations with Ivey and through this program, one of the things that I touched on is like, what is the story that's calling to me? So not my agenda, like I want to push out my own research, but like, what is the story that keeps popping up? And that story happened to be this year-long ongoing conversation with my dad about his experience growing fiber hemp. All the way from first being approached by the NC State professor and my daddy trying to figure out, how do we get the license to actually do that? All the way to it grows so tall and he says, let's go have a photo shoot out there because it's just fun and interesting. I was concerned that maybe he wouldn't want me to tell this story. He grew it in the pasture in the back. I asked him why. He said, well, I didn't want everybody to see it. So in telling this story, I was going to put his face at the front, right? But I just had a conversation, and ultimately, I think it was helpful in the sense that it became less about, let me tell you the science, as I've been trained, but let me tell you a story about how climate is showing up for somebody that y'all trust, who's my daddy. Like a member of this community, a farmer, the salt of the earth. Let me tell you how he's navigating that. And so I hope that I represented him in a great way, and I'm thankful that he allowed me to share his story.
Oh, we're thankful he allowed you to share his story. And I think that brings us to a really good point, which is how do you navigate journalistic objectivity while working on a story this personal?
Yeah. So I'll be the first one to say I don't think of myself as a journalist, but something that researchers, scientists have in common is that we try to communicate ideas, right? And we struggle with this concept of objectivity in the scientific world too. I assume many of you who are in media and public affairs would have similar conversations. It's really about I feel like the most objective I can be is by acknowledging the subjectivity, and that if we can get that out there. And so, you know, in telling this story, it was important for me to tell you the farmer I'm interviewing is my daddy. I could have easily said I'm just interviewing a farmer, and you wouldn't have known, right? But I mean, it's critical to the story that I tell you, this is my father that I love dearly. So now when you're reading that story, you can look through those lenses. But I also tried to keep some scientific standards. I recorded our interview and I transcribed it just like I did everybody else's. And I texted him and said, do I have your permission to do, just like everybody else, right? And so I tried to find some kind of balance that made sense for us in that way. And you know, where you end up on the spectrum is okay as long as we don't try to negate people who choose another positionality, because I think it takes all of us in our own way to tell the stories.
Yeah, yeah. And so in that realm, Joshua, how do you navigate going into communities and your identity and respect for yourself as well as those that you're working with?
Well, that's a multifaceted approach. You know, doing this for so long, for 15 years, you know, you have different approaches, you know, for different tribes. Learning, like when I get called out, I would take the initiative to learn, you know, what certain customs are, you know, call someone up either on council or just someone like a PIO to kind of get an idea of how they approach them, you know, because we're all different. There's different ways of approaching people, and not just the native part, but, you know, non-natives too, you know, like doing, looking to see what would work for everybody. You know, that's kind of it's really complicated, you know, like just going into an area you don't know. So I try to figure out what's the best approach for a lot of things, and relying on other people. You know, I'm not really the expert there. I'd rather have someone there from their tribe or something to come help me, you know, as like a cultural specialist to inform me of certain customs. And in doing so, you know, growing up on a reservation, you know, there's certain ways you treat elders, you know, there's certain different ways of presenting yourself too.
Yeah, so it's about asking questions and then respecting those answers.
Just asking questions is the main thing I always try to point out for a lot of people. Just ask questions. Don't be afraid. You know, you might want to say something else, but just ask questions.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that's what we do, right, as journalists, ask a lot of questions. Yeah. And Taliyah, you're working in a lot of communities, some of which are close to home, some of which are further away from home. How do you go about making a difference in various community projects?
Well, for me, first and foremost, I think it's important to share your experience when you're first meeting with the communities. A lot of Indigenous communities, like you know, Indigenous peoples are storytellers. So you got to share a story with them to get a story back. It creates a safe space for the community so that they know that they're trusting their stories with someone that is going to take care of their words. Another thing is, like Joshua said, respecting the boundaries and accept that sometimes the story you want to tell isn't the story that you need to tell. It needs to be told by somebody else that has experienced it. My goal wasn't just to make a difference in my community, but it was also a call to action, or in better words, a plea to help or plea for help, because a lot of our traditions are dying. And, you know, studying Western academia, you can do that, like it's been established for years, but over the years, a lot more traditions have become extinct because a lot of people are rather learning from their elders, going to universities.
Yeah, no, it's hard work, but it's important. I think for all of us and everyone out here, it's just a reminder that everyone is Indigenous to somewhere. We all share this planet. And just because I'm telling you you're Indigenous doesn't mean you get to wear ours as a costume, so leave that at home. But, you know, it's about finding that connection to the land, to each other, and to all of that. And then finally, Robyn, how do you approach being a storyteller with those deep connections? And how does that matter with the stories that you want to tell?
Yeah, so I think about, you know, being a reporter in Montana, it's, especially an Indigenous reporter, there's only 2 Indigenous reporters in that whole entire state of Montana. And my mission was really to focus on Indigenous stories within the state. And I think about the story that I did recently during election season, and it was this Indigenous-led organization, Red Medicine LLC. And they were basically going to reservation, and they were basically encouraging people to vote on reservations and really educating them that their voice mattered in this election. Because growing up, I didn't feel like my vote would have any sort of impact because when you're a reservation kid and you grow up kind of secluded in that, you have a different mindset. And when I did the story, of course, I obviously have my own biases because I am Indigenous. And so I thought about how could I make this a story that would really impact a broader audience. And realistically, what was a great thing about it is 2024 was the anniversary of the Snyder Act, which means that Native Americans, have been citizens for 100 years. But being the first people of the land, when you think about that, it's just so, it really is shocking to me. So the way that I'm able to approach and tell those stories that truly matter to me is just kind of like I said before, how can I tell historical context with these stories and to modernize them so that people really do care?
Yeah, and then this is just a random for everyone, but also for ourselves. You know, as Indigenous people, we are not a monolith. Not one of us can speak to every tribe. There are 573 federally recognized tribes. And you know, some of those are recent, some of them, are there 574? 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. And that is also not counting the state or the state only recognized, or the state or neither state nor federally recognized, such as Hawaii. Most Native Hawaiians are not federally or state recognized as an Indigenous peoples tribe in the Native context. Also, Hawaii is an illegally occupied nation, so that's a whole different subject. But in that manner, like when I travel, I work with so many different Indigenous tribes, and I'm constantly going in, and my culture does not have the exact same traditions or things as other cultures, just as all communities and cultures do. And so how do any of you navigate making sure that you are respectful, careful, and allowing your identity and personhood to really stay at the forefront while respecting theirs? We'll just go down the line.
Wait, can you ask that again? Sorry.
I know. Just like what is, in just a few words, how do you make sure that you are maintaining your identity in a space where you have to acknowledge others' identities?
Yeah. I think about and I'm just going to talk about my own experience, but in being in a newsroom, I'm basically the minority there. And oftentimes I'm found to kind of be sort of the person who a lot of the other reporters go to, and they ask questions. Hey, how should I do this? But I feel like just sort of like what Taliyah said is that you have to create a boundary for yourself as far as like how far you're going to go, because I also want to be able to be a journalist and to be able to tell stories. So I think those boundaries aren't really black and white, but you kind of learn them along the way as far as creating your own boundaries for yourself so that you really don't get burnt out. Yeah.
Sweet. Joshua?
I would have to agree that creating those boundaries is what kind of helped me along as my career, especially, like I was thrown into a lot of these positions where I was the only Native American on those incident management teams, and I was working with other people that had tons more experience, and they kind of put me in the spot for a lot of stuff. So looking back on those experiences, I could have approached a lot differently, but having those boundaries set, is what I think would have helped a lot. And still, I still follow that. I feel wanting to share more, kind of encourage them to, encourage people to learn more about it, but also respecting what my culture, what my grandfather and everyone had taught me growing up. Like this is you. This is always going to be you, no matter where.
Sweet. Okay, sorry, we got to wrap up our time. But I think the big thing is remember boundaries, but at the same time, we did not cross the border crossed us. Thank you very much.